good way to sink it.
There you go.
What's up, Chris, man? How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, it's cool to be here.
Yeah. So
Nice.
a little bit about yourself. I know you grew up in Humboldt, yeah?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Silvey. I grew up here in Humboldt. Actually grew up out in Neeland, which is a pretty rural area. So went to the little Neeland school, which is, 40, 50, 60 kids in kindergarten through 8th grade.
Damn.
Did that through 7th grade. Which was, pretty cool living out there. Kind of learned how to do everything outside, which is pretty cool. So, had a good time with that. And then went to Zane Junior High in Eureka for 8th grade, and then went to Eureka High, graduated in 2000. And then pretty much as soon as I graduated, went straight in the military. Spent 6 years.
Yeah, 2000, right? So
Yeah.
it's right when you're, 19, September 11th hit?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
And so did that kind of influence you a little bit to go in, or what?
Well, I was already on active duty when that happened. Before I went in, and so I went to basic training in the summer of 2000, right after I graduated. And
So what made you want to go in?
I had always wanted to do it. That was a big part of it. Not sure why. I just had always been kind of intrigued by the idea of doing something fun.
Did you have family history? Usually always some
yeah,
kind of
like
thing.
grandfathers. Both my grandfathers served. It was just kind of something that seemed like it would be fun and exciting. I don't think I was a particularly mature kid or anything, but I certainly, for some reason, thought that it was a little like I'd hear the other high school seniors talking about, oh yeah, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go do that, and kind of thinking, you don't know what you're going to do. Like, you're 17 years old. You don't know what you want to do with your life. And it's kind of like, I'm going to go do something else. And I think just personality wise, I'd always had a bit of an independent streak and kind of just wanted to get out on my own and feel like I was standing on my own 2 feet. So went and did that.
Yeah.
It was a easy way to kind of get out of here for a little while and, go be on my own. So, went straight in the Army and was stationed with the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii, which, was not a bad place to be.
Your first station was Hawaii?
Yeah, it was. It ended up in my enlistment contract. When I enlisted, I was aware of like the college money and things like that. And so I was sort of looking at those things, but mostly I was focused on making sure I got the job I wanted, because I really wanted to be a helicopter crew chief. So when I got there and was signing everything, and they're telling me, well, you get so much college money, you get this and that. And they say, oh, you get your first duty station of choice. You get to go wherever you want. And I was like, oh, and I hadn't given any thought at all. I'd never seen a map of where everything was. Like, I didn't know. And it was before the internet. So it's not like you could just rip your phone out and look it up and be like, oh, where's cool, right?
Yeah.
So I'm literally sitting there with this guy who just wants me to pick something, right? And he's got this big drop down, pop-up menu on his computer. And so he's just going down and he's listing off all these places and, Fort such and such, Fort such and such. And I got no idea where any of these are anywhere in the world. And then he's like, Hawaii. And I was like, well, Hawaii, huh? And he's like, yeah, Hawaii. I was like, sure, that sounds cool. Why not? So it was sort of this fluke thing. Was very cool. Was a nice place to be. So, but I was there on September 11th. So, which was an interesting morning because I actually lived off of, we had the Wheeler Army Airfield where our aircraft worked and our hangar was, and that's where I worked. But I lived across the highway, which you had to leave post and then drive on to the main Army post. And I was in the barracks over there. And of course, everything had basically gone down by 9 o'clock or something, 10 o'clock in the morning in New York, but it's 4 o'clock in the morning in Hawaii. So my roommate and I get up in the barracks and we just throw PTs on and we go down and get in the car and, put a CD in or whatever. So we're not even we're not thinking to turn on the news or anything, right? And we try to get on post and there's literally a line of cars 2-3 miles long and waiting. And it wasn't until we actually we just kept listening to music thinking, oh, well, whatever, they're doing something stupid at the gate, and then we get up there and we're like, oh, they're actually really serious. And so I think eventually we got to the hangar and they had a TV out and I was watching the news, but none of that was going on when I enlisted. I was sort of thinking, oh, I'll spend 6 years flying around in Hawaii, have a great time, maybe learn to surf or something and then move on with life. And, lo and behold, here, have a war on top of that. So, but then, spent 6 years, in the Army. Went to Bosnia, which is a pretty cool, actually pretty cool experience.
Was it like Eastern Europe?
Yeah, the Balkan states on, just across the way there, just east of Italy.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we were, part of the stabilization force that's over there, the NATO thing. And so we were, it wasn't it's not like a war zone. You know, you're just kind of there doing, chilling.
Yeah.
As long as you're there, there's nothing really going on. So, that was a pretty cool experience. And then ended up going to Afghanistan 0405 and was stationed at FOB Salerno, which is the forward operating base up by the Pakistani border.
Yeah. So you were, let's say early in your mid-20s then when you went to Afghanistan?
Yeah, I was 22.
And so were you confused on why you were going to Afghanistan and not Iraq?
I don't think I was confused about why we were going to Afghanistan because the 25th Infantry Division is a light infantry division.
Right.
And so, we don't have a bunch of tanks rolling around everywhere. So the unit itself is probably more suited to what was going on in Afghanistan at the time. Okay. And I don't know, that's way above my pay grade.
Yeah,
but however,
true.
that cookie crumbled. That was just where we ended up going. So,
because I remember, at that age, you're just like, yeah, roger that. I'll do whatever you.
Oh,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Wherever I'm going, Yeah. Oh, it's always interesting to me now that I'll think back on that. I have so many places where it's like, I remember being somewhere and I have like distinct memories of being on some airport somewhere, and I don't even know what country we were in. Just stick you on a plane, and you make a couple stops, and then they get off, and you're where you were supposed to be, and you don't really think about it much. And then later, it's like, wait, where was I? Where was that?
Secret squirrel spot.
Right. Yeah.
Big.
Yeah. Who knows?
Who knows? Mm-hmm. So then, after you got out,
So and then got out of the military. Came back here, had always really wanted to work in law enforcement. So I went to the police academy, College of the Redwoods, worked for the city of Eureka for a couple of years. Just kind of got burned out on that. Wasn't happy with few different things, but ended up deciding somehow when I was enlisting, somehow was asked to, they offered me a $20,000 cash enlistment bonus. But of course they were prefacing that with, you'll get taxed on it, you get about 12 of it. And they're like, or you can have $50,000 added onto your GI Bill. And so I thought somehow at 17, I realized that was the smarter financial move. And so I took that. And so when I sat down and looked at how the old GI Bill worked, I was like, I could totally afford to go to school. So, ended up going back and going to Humboldt State. Actually went back to College of the Redwoods and then did 2 years there, then did 2 years, finished my bachelor's in psychology at Humboldt State, and then got my master's degree through University of Southern California. Did that because they have my master's degree is actually a master's of military social work and veteran services. So they're the only school, I believe, or were at the time the only school other than the Army War College that actually has a military specific social work program that's at least that's clinical or clinically focused, and so ended up deciding to go there for graduate school, which I'm glad I did. It was a really, really good educational experience there. So anyway, and then since then I've been working as a counselor, working mostly almost exclusively with combat veterans, which has been a pretty fulfilling career so far. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So going to the military school, that was more appealing, that you got to kind of work with the vets since you'd already been there, rather than just normal civilians with maybe, because that's kind of interesting too. Like you specifically kind of the military side of things, whereas in civilians, it's like fucking open field, it's like anything could happen kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that I realized, and I don't mean this as criticism of anybody, but one of the things that I kind of realized when I was going to HSU and I was looking at, basically my cohort of fellow students there, and I just kind of realized there's really no other veterans here, not in that field. And I would imagine if you did sort of a, personality assessment of, generally speaking, the people that are interested in getting into behavioral health, and then you do the same for people who are coming out of the military, you have two very divergent types of people. And so it's hard to relate, I think, sometimes with a lot of civilian therapists, which, make no mistake, it's really hard to find a therapist anyhow. I have, lots of clients that'll say, oh, I'm trying to find somebody to see my wife or whatever. And they'll, they've called every private practice person and nobody's available, or maybe there's one person, but it's cash only and they don't take any insurance or something like that. There's a certain need for that. But having personally been through my own experiences going to therapy to work through some of the things that, affected me after being in the military, I kind of realized, like, you could spend 45 minutes of your hour session with a counselor trying to explain why something's important, without actually having been in the military and having that context of, well, this is why this would be a big deal. That kind of piece is always missing. And so it's, I think, difficult to relate, to feel like anyone really understands what that's like.
Very true.
So to be able to sit down with somebody and sort of go, well, it's maybe 50 years apart, but, I know what it's like to, say, get shot at, right? That's a different thing. There's not, just not a whole lot of that available for people. So I think it's maybe a different perspective that I have on some of those things than some other people. So
you probably thought you had more to offer also, like in that
yeah, genre. Like it was a big part of the reason I got into it. It was a place where I thought, well, okay, I know this and I could probably be most effective here. Because if I were being honest, that would be the thing that might concern me working with, outside of the population that I do now, would be, from my own side, it's a little difficult if the perhaps magnitude of what someone brings in seems really insignificant in comparison to what my base of experience is working with.
Then it's more difficult to help the person.
Right, it's harder to help
because it's genuinely help them, but you're just like, we're not there.
Right, and it's hard to acknowledge it as if I think all these things happen on a spectrum. So if whatever happens to somebody's the worst thing that ever happened to them, then that's real for them, right? But if the worst thing that ever happened to somebody is they stubbed their toe, right? And you're sitting here with people who've experienced far, far worse and more traumatic things than that, then it does make it difficult kind of to go that way. That being said, I think that the opposite is true too. I think I've had a lot of clients who have reported that in working with non-veteran therapists over the years, that there were times where either they weren't fully disclosing what was going on for them, or they either weren't fully disclosing, or they were deliberately withholding information because they're worried about overwhelming the person, because they just think this person can't possibly understand this.
Right.
So I think being able to work from a place where, I can offer that to a population that, hey, I've been there, I know what it's like, sit down and talk.
Yeah. It's almost a necessity if you think about it.
I think it can be.
Yeah.
I tried to make that argument a few times, got shut down, and I think correctly so, that there are people out there who, for whatever reason, it does click and they do get it, or they just have a style where
that still helps.
It helps, and they're able to do that. But in terms of overcoming some of the specific barriers a lot of veterans have, you end up with things, getting mental health treatment's probably not something that's the most socially accepted thing within that group, right? Mm-hmm. It's becoming infinitely more so. It certainly is, I would say, more now than when I started in this career. It's certainly much more than when I left the military. But it's not gone. Yeah. And I think that, one of the ways to kind of break that stigma down a little bit and get past their fear of it. Is the fear is, well, all you're going to do is sit me down and say, well, are you going to kill yourself? And, tell me about when you were a little kid. And they're going to go there, when you can offer something that's far more conversational, and it's more, just tell me what's been going on, right? I'll piece together the other pieces. That I think is a very different piece. It's a little disarming.
Right. And people don't know that's your intention, is just to be like, hey, what's up, man?
Right.
Just like, talk to me.
Yeah, talk to me. What's going on?
Why do you think that stigma has kind of changed over the time? Maybe just like the access of information that people have that, they can, or maybe like, I don't know, stories from other people that kind of give their piece, that, try to put a good light on things.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it is generational. I think, I think our generation of veteran is far more likely to be willing to wake up one day and go, okay, you know what? I'm not doing okay. I'm not okay. My life is not working the way I want it to work. Maybe this would be beneficial. When you compare that to, say, Vietnam era veterans, right, where when they were leaving the service and coming home, it was, 10 years or better before they even had PTSD as a diagnosis. So crazy. Right. So they didn't really have that. And of course, they're looking at a whole generation of fathers who are World War II veterans, right, who certainly never engaged in any of that. Right. Now, there may have been a reason why, the central figure in the, office in the 1950s and 60s was a bar, right? Like, and people were drinking on the job, all kinds of things and impacts from that, but it wasn't go see the shrink. Mm-hmm. So I think some of that is just that over time, with every generation, it's become more accepted. And I think a lot of it for our generation, it's because I would say there's less social pressure. Or maybe pressure is not the right word, but there are fewer other influences. For example, a couple generations ago, somebody might be getting more of that mental health treatment, say, from a member of the clergy, right? They could get that from their church, or they're part of other organizations. The World War II veterans very much had the VFW. So whether they realize it or not, and, whether drinking in a bar is the best setting is arguable, but they're all sitting around being able to have a place to go be with other veterans and tell their war stories, right? And then you had a Vietnam era that came in that weren't welcomed by the World War II vets, generally speaking, because, well, you lost your war and, what are you crying about? And so they didn't have anywhere to go there.
Think about that.
Yeah. And then we eventually, around the time most of us are being born, right, or shortly before, you end up with a diagnosis being put in the DSM that's says, hey, here's PTSD. This is what it is. And then on top of that, then you get research, and you have a lot of advancements in, say, things like neural imaging, right, where now we can actually watch what goes on. So there's a lot more hard science to it. And I think that gets a lot of people in our generation to buy in. When somebody says, I could show you an image of, pre and post treatment for PTSD, and you can see the difference in functioning, then people go, okay, well, that's real. Right? Yeah. That's a little different than, the image 30 years ago of, we'll sit down and, tell me about your relationship with your mother, and then I'll tell you that about how that's why your PTSD is what it is.
Yeah. So you think therapists also evolved to make their questioning, instead of more like direct, like asking you about your childhood, to a more conversational, like, I'm just here to help?
I think to some degree, and I think, not that all of that,
or is it probably dependent on each therapist?
Yeah, and you're certainly going to get many that still work in those ways. Whichever way they choose to work. There's lots of different theories. There's no real right or wrong way necessarily. It's a practice. Yeah, we're figuring it out. Yeah. But that being said, yeah, I think at some point it was. We just moved into a spot where there was more hard science behind things. And so we could look at things a little better and start going, okay. And some of that is just the longitudinal research, right? So lots of behavioral health research takes decades to really effectively go, well, how well does this person get better? Right? Because if somebody's depressed, well, I mean, I could cure them very, very quickly, plenty of drugs you can give them, make them feel great. It'll last a short period of time, right? And then they go back to not working. So that's not going to work. So you have to look at, okay, we need to take somebody who's suffering from chronic major depression, and then we're going to do these therapies, and we're going to see if they're working. When we check in 20 years and they're actually doing better, and, everyone else we treated this way is doing better, now we can say, hey, that's an effective thing, right? And there was a point where that wasn't really possible. It was mostly kind of anecdotal stuff from, well, this is what we've always done, and maybe more of a practice that's now can be more guided. But I think that's been one of the pieces that has certainly been helpful in, I think, overcoming that stigma, is the ability that this isn't so much, this isn't you just not being able to think in the right way, right? This is something different. For example, something like major depression certainly can actually reach a point where you could look at a brain and go, okay, well, the brain requires a certain amount of, motivation to occur. These are the chemical processes that make that happen, right? And you might be able to establish a baseline below which you're not really capable of doing anything, right? And it's possible somebody could be there, and so they're laying in bed, and you're going, dude, just get up, come on, put your pants on, let's go do something, right? And they're actually physically incapable of doing it. And I think it's taken a long time in the research to get to a place where we recognize that and can go, oh, okay, this is a more real thing.
I think it's very interesting about how, like, okay, so generational, like, we're getting better at it. It's getting more exposed, getting more accepted, but now we're at a point also on the flip side of that coin where, like, mental health is at an all-time high. Depression's at an all-time high. Suicide's like going through the roof. So it's like, we're, we can be optimistic about it, but it's still a huge growing issue.
And there are infinite number of theories out there as to why all that is. I think there's
other than just population doubling every 10 years,
right, just getting huge. Which I think is a big thing for members of the military, because I don't know if you've read Sebastian Junger's book Tribe, but it's a really good book that kind of alludes to essentially you become a member of this group, and you absolutely know that everyone in this group has your back, right? And you might be the brand new guy who got here yesterday, and people are still giving you a whole bunch of crap.
Relative to the military,
right?
Join this group, okay?
Yeah. So, like, if you're the new guy to a platoon in the military, sure, you're the new guy. They're gonna make you do stupid stuff. It's gonna, there's that little bit of kind of whatever, new guy. That being said, if something actually happened, somebody's gonna help you. They're gonna do whatever they can to help you. It's just the way that it works. I think some of the problem that causes specific for veterans is that it creates an unrealistic expectation for the rest of their life, because they leave the military with this understanding that, okay, my friends will do X for me. And when they get out into a more complex civilian world where, sure, there's lots of different people that you're going to have varying levels of connection to, right? And they're not all willing to help you do anything. There's degrees of this, and it seems very complex, and the military operates in some sense it's about as a communal as an environment as we have in this country.
You see the same uniform, you're like, all right, same team,
team, right? We're all here, and we all live in the same building, we all get paid the same paycheck, we all have a roof over our head, right? We all go eat at the same chow hall. It's this, everything you have and need is all provided. It's very regulated. And the structure certainly serves a great purpose. It's part of why the military works the way it does. That being said, when you get out, if you're looking for that, you're not going to find it. And the reason for that is because if somebody doesn't want to go with the program in the military, they just boot them out, right? That's why you don't have, homeless people on a military post, because you're either here working and doing your part, or you're not, and you're gone. And it's very black and white. And needs to be, I think, for that situation. But, you get out and you come out here, and it's a whole different thing. But you're right with regard to people who are, the rates of mental health. I read something not long ago that was apparently from samples. I believe they were saliva samples that were found from people who'd been committed to a mental institution in the 1950s. I want to say it was early 1950s, and they measured the cortisol levels of these people who'd been committed for being insane, which is essentially your stress hormone, and determined that the average and then they compared it to high school students today, and the average high school student has a higher cortisol level than somebody who was in an institution in the 50s. So it's like we're in this super stressful world. And we've done it to ourselves in lots of ways.
Yeah,
you know, there's
totally.
no, you know, very few people have that close knit group anymore. We've moved into a place where it's all about have as many friends as you can on social media, and the fact that, you know, you can either choose between building up a group of 4 or 5 friends that are really, really close that you have meaningful relationships with, maybe, or you can try to promote your Instagram account and get 2 million followers. Right. And it's like, and people are choosing, you know, quantity over quality essentially, and not realizing that that's not really beneficial or rewarding. It only is in so much as it needs to continue to happen. You know, okay, you get 2 million followers, but what happens when that number completely stops and freezes?
Yeah.
You know, well, now what? You know, what does that mean? Does everyone hate me now? Yeah, people read into it.
Yeah, I think since I kind of came out, it was different. Like, I feel like I just don't trust anybody. Like any civilian, like I just, I'll give you your worth, but I have a feeling you might stab me in the back if anything were to go against against the way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just like that weird, like, okay, I'm just not going to trust you. Like,
Right.
we can be friends, but I will not trust you with my life.
Right.
And it's just, it's a weird, weird feeling.
It's a strange thing. It's one of the reasons I think that, you know, probably the single biggest common thread I see with my clients is usually some level of social isolation. It's some unwillingness to engage with the rest of the world. And that can look like very different things. I've had people that were essentially a shut-in and barely leave their house to, you know, people that appear very gregarious and they're doing all these things, but I become aware that it's a tremendous amount of work for them to be doing all of this, and it's exhausting to them, and it's not just something they're doing to have fun. But yeah, it's trying to build that peer group. You know, like I said, when you've had friends that will, you know, take a bullet for you ostensibly, what does that mean then when you're out here? There's no way to measure what this person's at.
Right.
You know, to what degree can they help me, and to what degree will they help me? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what would you say about like different versions of PTSD? I know version's not the right word for it, but like, you know, because PTSD can occur from many different things, and everyone is different with it. So to just kind of like slap PTSD across the board to everybody, like, you got it, you got it, everyone, you know, and it's like, well, you know, this guy, you know, very different.
Yeah. And I think there's certainly varying degrees. You know, for some people, it is that they have full blown flashbacks. They, you know, which is not an intrusive memory, right? That's not just, oh, I'm thinking about this thing that occurred. A flashback, by definition, is a re-experiencing. So for that period of time, the person really in their mind believes that they were back having that event happen again. You know, and there are certainly people that have that major impacts like that. You know, I've worked with Vietnam veterans that, you know, they're getting 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night for 50 years. You know, major impacts like that. Yeah, down to people who, very common for people to be functioning at a pretty high level. They're really doing pretty well at life by the measures that society would probably put on them, right? Sure. They've got a family, they're raising their kids, they're not going to jail, they're working a job, they're paying their bills, they're paying their taxes, whatever, you know, they're doing their piece. And, you know, that being said, if you sit them down, you're like, okay, but, you know, how often do you find yourself thinking about something that happened, right? And then, well, you know, a few times a week, you know, okay. And when you get in there, you'll see the more, I guess you could say, kind of insidious ways it can get in. And, you know, that looks like a lot of things. But I would say probably the most common is people just getting stuck in a situation that's not necessarily comfortable, but it's known. And so it becomes this piece of, you know, okay, this is kind of a miserable spot. I'm not real happy with it, but I know how to manage the threats I currently have. I know what resources I have to work with. And the idea that I'm going to take any risk to go do anything else it just doesn't happen. You know, usually because they look at it and there's some perceived failure or not a perceived failure, but they'll look at it and perceive that there's a risk they won't be able to mitigate. And that's where I think coming from the military impacts it. And I use this kind of spiel a lot with my clients, but every time I'm going to go get on my helicopter, we're going to go fly somewhere and do something. We have a briefing, and that briefing covers everything that could possibly go wrong, right? And so we talk about, well, what happens if one of the aircraft breaks down? What if one of them has a forced landing? What if one of them has to cut its sling load? What if we get shot at? What if someone actually gets shot down? What if? And you plan for all those contingencies, right? Which certainly needed in combat, because in combat, you don't have time to go figure out, oh no, this happened unexpectedly. What should we do? You need to have that plan and just do it. The problem is that what's lost on a lot of us is that I think at the time, right, we think, oh, I'm going out and doing this mission and this seems sketchy. But if you really step back and think, okay, but there's I have the whole Department of Defense right here to step in, so on some level I knew, sure, I'll get on my helicopter, but if we get shot down and we're on some mountaintop somewhere, right, these people are going to come for me. I'm not just left there abandoned and alone. When people leave and they come to the civilian world and they have that realization that no one's there for you, not in that same way. If I don't show up to work, I'm not going to get a phone call 2 minutes after the time I was supposed to be there going, hey, where are you? Right.
Right.
They're probably just going to put me out sick for the day and be like, well, okay, we'll talk to them about needing to call in, It's that kind of stuff. And so I think that's it. That's the biggest adjustment that goes on. And I think it's fair to some degree to at least entertain the idea that sometimes what's getting labeled as PTSD may not be PTSD, that it may be more something like an anxiety adjustment disorder where, okay, leaving the military is a massive life change, particularly if somebody left as they commonly do, a very unstructured or chaotic upbringing, and then go into this highly regimented military lifestyle, and then they leave, they're left with a black and white comparison, and they're told to function in the gray, and they don't really know where their left and right limit is there, right? So then they're very stuck. Some of that, I think, just comes from the presumption on the part of, I think probably a presumption on the part of just generally most people that, well, if they're having a mental health problem and they served in a combat zone, it must be PTSD that's doing it. And I don't know to what degree that may be true, but, certainly not uncommon for the symptoms and things to be, I don't know, not necessarily quite honestly, people just not meeting diagnostic criteria for PTSD. They have some of the symptoms, but they don't have enough of them or have them frequently enough that we would consider it to really be a disorder. But I think it's something. So generally, I think it's more an anxiety thing of, hey, you're out and don't have any structure, and now what are you supposed to do? You know? So
yeah, and I think, and it's hard too when you get those people that are like crying wolf, and they're taking resources away from people that aren't crying anything, but they really need the help.
Sure.
So now you're helping people that don't need help, and the people that need help aren't getting any attention.
Right.
And now you're just like, and you can't, like, you're stuck.
Yeah, kind of stuck there.
You're stuck.
And the thing of it is too, is that it's another very real reality is that sometimes it's difficult to tell which ones are legit. And I've had some times, where maybe I see somebody for a long time, months even, and we're just, maybe we're managing some little things and we're doing some education and we're sort of picking up stuff. And then we kind of get to a point where I'll be having a conversation around usually treatment planning and saying, okay, well, what are we working on? What do you feel like you need to change? If you wave your magic wand and something's different in your life, what would that look like? Right. And then it comes out, oh, well, I wish, and they have some major piece of their life that is awful. Well, I haven't slept more than an hour or two ever. Oh, why not? Well, I can't go to sleep. I lay there and stare at the ceiling, and then I fall asleep and have nightmares and wake up and I don't like it, so I don't go back to sleep. and I've just conditioned myself to function on very little sleep. Okay, well, let's work at that. So sometimes it can look too like you have something that's not, I don't want to say a big deal, but it doesn't look, I guess, particularly concerning or alarming. And then when you get down the road, it sort of comes out. But I think that can be another unique thing to working with veterans, that it takes a little more and a little longer to kind of get that stuff out. And bit. For them to feel safe. They need to kind of feel like, okay, this is a friendship that looks a little bit like what I had in the military, so maybe I can trust it, right? Mm-hmm. And then when that therapeutic relationship gets kind of built to that point, then it works.
Yeah.
So yeah, not uncommon for that. But not again, it's very real that it is very real that there are some percentage of people who present trying to get some kind of mental health services because as veterans, there's the secondary gain of the piece where, sure, you get paid disability money if you have a disability that they determine is serious enough. And I've seen it happen. I've certainly seen the system kind of get worked. If you know what to say and come in and say and do, you can create a situation. But the sad part there is that what I've seen more often than not is people living down to that standard. They get out and they're struggling, and I understand the desire for, this looks like an easy way to increase financial resources, so I'll go down that road. The problem is once they have it, then they go, now I have to maintain it. So here's my letter. It says I'm so, however disabled they've determined, and now I have to stay there. And there can be the perceived consequence that if I work and get better and my symptoms are alleviated at all, then I lose money, which is inverse from how therapy normally works. So normally you have to pay money and then they're supposed to help you, but there's an incentive on your part financially to not use it more than you need to. Mm-hmm. And what happens to some degree working with veterans, and not by any means all or even a majority, but there's some where that's what ends up happening, is you end up in a place where the demand is coming in not because there's a real need, it's just because there's a financial incentive.
Right. And I mean, the rat race is hard enough.
And I don't blame it. It's hard enough out here. It's hard to get by on even a good job these days. So I get it. I understand why people do go down that road. And not to say that they're not deserving of the benefits. I mean, I certainly think that, people are entitled to be compensated for the things that have happened to them.
So in the, looking ahead, what would you see any changes that would kind of benefit the whole industry? Do you think just a better, just more spread of knowledge that it is going to help you if you just give it a shot?
Yeah.
I feel like that's the only way, right?
Yeah.
It's just come in.
Yeah. I think that's really where it's at. It's really, I think the biggest components that are going to change. And so my father was a counselor locally in private practice for 30 some years and recently retired. And when I look at how his career went and you look at, the research and the way the practices were done back when he started his career, certainly helped a ton of people, but a lot of it's very different than what we know today. That goes back, I think, partially to the neural imaging, partially to we have some good longitudinal research at this point. But I think we're starting to see some changes both in medications. So, for a long time, PTSD is an anxiety disorder. And so we say, okay, well, if people are having panic attacks, well, all right, give them some Xanax, and then here you go. And what we find is that, yes, that will take the edge off your panic attack. It'll pull you out of it, but it's a panic attack. It's not going to last that long anyway. You can learn to manage those yourself if you want to apply it. The issue becomes that if you were to look at if you were to graph out how severe someone's symptoms are, and these studies have been done where they'll look at, on a scale of 1 to 10, people are all 8s and 9s when they come in, and they start two groups of people, and one of them's getting therapy and one of them's getting medication and therapy. And what they find is that they'll both make considerable improvement over time. But if you go, say, a year and then you stop the group that has medication, if you stop their medication, they tend to go back where they were, or at least get worse. Whereas the group that just got therapy just continues to get better, right?
And it was a crutch,
right? It's a crutch, and it's shutting down to some degree the parts of your brain that you need working in order to be able to make those behavioral changes. So, it's not really
helping.
It's
just a little Band-Aid.
Right. So now those have become contraindicated. So for years when I first got out of and would go in, and I think one of my complaints at the time was, I have a really hard time going to sleep at night. I'll just and it wasn't that I was sitting here thinking about all this awful stuff in my head, which is usually how people conceptualize it. I'm just sitting there thinking about all the dumb things I got to do tomorrow, but for whatever reason they just keep looping and I can't get out of it. And so you go to the VA. Well, the first thing they're trying to give you is some kind of benzodiazepine. Here's some Xanax or whatever. And that was just the way that it worked. That was how that seemed to go. From what I've heard from other veterans, that seems like that was kind of the common practice. Now they're not prescribing those medications for PTSD anymore because we realize they don't help. There's also some new stuff coming out. There's actually an injection that I am not super familiar with, but I need to look at. It's called I believe a stellate ganglion block injection, where they can actually put a needle in and put some, I believe it's a steroid or something, kind of numbs up a certain portion of the spine, which presents these panic signals, I guess, from getting to the body, and has this big impact on things like anger and anxiety and stuff. And I'm like, I think we may start seeing more of that, because that's just, how that's what we do. We're going to keep working at finding ways to treat it. So I think there's some changes that are going to come, in terms of how conceptualizing it more as a medical issue as opposed to, it's a mental health. It's a problem with how you think, right? I think society's shifting a little bit from looking at it that way. And then the other pieces, I think,
but I mean, bare bones, it is kind of that though. Like how you're approaching it and how you're thinking it.
Right. And that is the part. I mean, there's a neurological basis for all of it, but at the end of the day, yes, you're going to have to make your own decisions. You're going to have to do your own thing. And, if you're coming to see me, you're going to have to come see me, and then we're going to come up with a plan or talk about what you're going to do or whatever. And then you're going to need to leave and actually do that, which is, another part of, I think, one of the bigger challenges of the profession is getting it to leave the office. It's pretty easy to get somebody to come up with a plan, but finding out ways to do that in a meaningful way that it sticks so that they actually remember to do what they're supposed to do when they get down the road to that situation, I think is one of the harder parts of what we do. But yeah.
And then also just like the easy button of taking the medication.
Right.
People, that's just the easy way out.
Yeah.
If you see a direct, maybe not long-term correction, but just a very immediate relief, then it just becomes easier to take it again.
Right. Right. And that is one of the other things with medication is that, and I'm not a psychiatrist, I can't speak super knowledgeably about it, but from what I do know, one of the pieces about it is that you have most of the medications we have either have a really significant rapid impact, right? Like a Xanax or something, or you're looking at something, like fluoxetine, which is Prozac. And that's could be a very, very slow process, right? Somebody might have to start on a low dose and they take it for a month or two and nothing's really happening. And so they take a little bit more and it goes another month. It takes a long time to adjust. And we live in a society where we tend to kind of discard anything that doesn't work the way, say an opiate pain medication would, right? If I don't take this and feel better soon. And so I do see that. I see a lot of people who, I don't really advocate for people to take medication or not. That's a very personal decision for people. Certainly many people who come and say, hey, I've been really, really helped by that. Great. Have also seen a lot of people who haven't taken any medication where they, or they, I guess I shouldn't say they haven't taken it, but I see a lot of people who have tried it, but they say, well, I took it for 3 weeks and nothing happened. Like, well, they told you had to take it for at least a month before you might notice it taking an effect. You got to stick with it, and they'll go off and on them.
And then you're not going to see the effect and be like, oh, well, it didn't work. It's like,
okay. Or another common one is ones where people will get on something, and some of those medications do work in ways where you do need to take them consistently. If you miss a dose or two, it can really have an impact. And so if you want to come off of it, you need to be titrated off of it and come down slowly, not just stop taking it. And I've seen that a number of times where people will just kind of stop taking it, and then it's this rapid downhill, which they attribute to, well, I started taking that medication, and then 2 weeks later I had all these symptoms. And it's like, well, okay.
Yeah. And then if they're going to tell the truth on whether they stopped taking it or not,
right.
Now it's like the rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it's certainly medication is one of those pieces that's helped a lot of people. I've met a lot of people that have really felt like they were lives where quality of life was immensely improved having done that. That being said, I don't, I think probably, depending on level of commitment, I think most of the time people could probably make those same improvements without the medications. In most of the cases that I am working with, there are certainly mental health disorders that you're not going to do anything without medication. But in my particular field, that I don't know that I really think that that's a needed thing in every case, for sure. So yeah.
I mean, we're getting there, but you want to wrap it up and talk a little bit more about maybe like are you plan on staying in this field? You happy with the choices that you've made so far in your life?
Yeah, so far it's been good. It's been good. I find it pretty rewarding working where I do. So it's that field is one that means something to me. So I think that that alone would probably keep me in it in some form or another. I think really moving forward, what I want to focus on is trying to get more involved in some of the more non-traditional types of things that we can use that are effective treatments. Doing things like trying to, figure out ways to take groups of veterans backpacking up, go up the Trinity Alps or something. And that has a tremendously positive impact to just get out in nature, get some physical activity, go spend, camaraderie. In many ways, a group of veterans out there has a bit of the same feel that you had in the military. So I think putting people back in those situations where, look, you're self-dependent here and you're fine, it can be really big. So I want to try to move towards doing some of that and being able to take people out, get people doing more things.
It almost seems like the easiest answer, because it's like, well, you're either going to spend the day in your room and not leave, or you're going to spend the day like outside, busy and distracted.
Right.
Aside from all the other positive benefits, like you're not going to be in your room.
Right.
No, and like that's be ultimately the issue.
Yeah.
Is just get the hell out of your room.
Yeah. Get it. And clean up your damn room first.
Right.
Clean it up. Make sure that you have somewhere that's pleasant to be, because that's, that goes back to that. If you're in this uncomfortable place, people sometimes I literally have had people where they're like, well, that place is kind of such a mess that, like, both figuratively and literally, that they don't want to leave because it's worse when you come back. And so it's the I don't want to go because then I have to come back to this mess, so I'm just going to stay in it. Those happen. But it's one of the things that I think, again, working with whether it's PTSD or just exposure to trauma, most people really accept the idea that, hey, if I or anybody go through some traumatic event, there's going to be an impact, right? And I'm going to think about it, and I may feel panicked at times. And those very anxious, intrusive symptoms are the things that we pretty easily understand why that person's doing it. Even if they're flipping out and throwing things, we still on some level can go, well, okay, that makes sense given what they've been through. What's harder to understand is why can't I get up off the couch? Like, why am I just sitting here stuck? And that's the place where I work with people along that line of, okay, but this is a complete defense, right? If we develop an idea that the world is dangerous and we don't believe that we can absolutely mitigate all the risks, or at least mitigate them effectively enough that we're willing to go out there, then, hey, what's safer than stay home, right? And so the brain will just create that depression of don't get up, don't go outside, don't go do anything. And it's not fun, but it's safe. You know, and what risk are you taking when you're holding the couch down and watching TV? You know, that's a safe place to be.
So yeah, maybe these group things, you know, you're going to feel safe because you got a bunch of other veterans out there.
And it takes a while to unlearn that stuff too. You know, certainly makes sense that, you know, you go out into the world and the world shows you a bunch of really awful stuff. Yes, that's going to be your impression of the world, unless you go put yourself back in it and recognize that, okay, but there's also a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of fun stuff. There's a lot of good people out here. A lot of people doing really good things for other people out here. Not everyone's out fighting and trying to hurt each other. But those lessons, mainly, I guess you could say they're not quite as impactful as, let's say, a trauma. So it takes a lot more of them. But I think with most clients I've worked with, I think that really becomes one of the big determinant factors in long-term outcome prognosis kind of talk. I would say, well, you know, what are they doing? You know, do they get up and leave their house and go do something? Because if they do, they're likely to find some niche somewhere that works for them, that makes them happy, and then they'll go from there. You know, the bigger concern is the isolation and hanging out completely alone. But yeah, taking people outside, doing stuff like that, get some physical exercise, you know, that stuff's huge. You know, and I can't really, you know, think.
So more field trips.
Yeah. More field trips, more field trips, you know, give yourself good stuff. I mean, and we lecture that a lot about, you know, make sure you're drinking enough water and you're not drinking too much caffeine, and you know, don't drink too much alcohol. And we talk about all this, you know, kind of garbage in, garbage out results. And you know, I personally pretty much cut out sodas and anything really sweetened a year or two ago. And, you know, I felt so much better within about a month. You know, it's like, oh, how was I doing that? You know,
right.
And so we talk about that in terms of our physical health all the time, but we don't talk about what that is with our mental health, right? And so, you know, somebody gets up in the morning and they turn on the news, right? And whether you agree with it or not, it's about conflict and anger and competition and nothing communal feeling about it. And they do that, and then they go to wherever their job is, and they, you know, deal with whatever stressors they've got, and then they come home and they turn the TV on again and watch more of this stuff, and they're never in a place to take in anything really positive. And so we don't really talk about, well, you know, you're going to have to seek that out. You know, you seek out some good piece of news, you know, sit down and read a book, do whatever, something that is a positive thing for you. So, yeah.
That's big too, yeah. And I was just thinking, I was like, yeah, if you come home and the dishes are already done, like you're already in a better mood as soon as you step in the door. You're just like, oh, nice.
Well, and the other thing is that, and this is particularly true of veterans, right? So you know how the military works, where you're measured along a lot of different standards, but those standards are known to everyone. They're universal and they're very set. Right. So you have a certain score you have to shoot at the rifle range, right? You have a certain set of basic tasks as far as, you know, the things that the military believes everyone in your position should know, right? And so you have all the common task stuff. You have a PT test with, you know, okay, you're going to go out and do 2 minutes of push-ups and 2 minutes of sit-ups and a 2-mile run, and you have minimum scores for each of those. And we tend to look at it and go, you know, some guy could get 100% in all of those things, but be 1 second too slow on his run, and he's a failure. You're a failure. You can't be promoted. You can't get an award. You can't go to school. Nothing positive is going to happen for you because of that. And that kind of standard is you know, it doesn't exist when you leave the military, but that's the standard that we'll sort of hold ourselves to. And if we don't think that we or someone else can meet the standard, then we're not going to engage. And I think that can be one of the pieces that holds people back, is that, you know, okay, well, I want to start a business, but I don't know what success would look like. Like, I don't know. And since there's no manual and there's no one there to tell me this is when you'll know you've succeeded, then I'm not taking that risk.
Or they think like, oh, success is like the mansion with the Ferrari. And it's like, well, then I'm never going to get there.
Right.
And then
Yeah. Very, very easy to kind of fall into some of those those traps, but you know, we can set standards and things for ourselves. And that's one of the best ways, I think, to kind of work moving forward is sort of look at, okay, well, what are your goals, you know, and then just assessing, are they realistic? You know, are they actually attainable? And if they are, then okay, you know, break that down into different pieces and start working through the steps. And, you know, that's a very military way of thinking.
Totally.
And so one of the challenges I would give people is, you know, do that, you know, try to do that, actually go do what you want to go do, just see how it works out. Yeah.
Well, sweet. Let's end it there. And I mean, if anyone listened all the way to the end, you want to plug on how any possible resources that people could reach out to find help? And
for anybody who's a veteran, I would strongly encourage them to, you know, reach out to the VA, reach out to the Vet Center system, reach out to other veterans groups. They're, by and large, in my experience, most of the people that are there are really trying to help. You know, often in VA stuff, it's an overworked system. And as best I can tell, there's a lot of people that are, you know, they're doing the best they can. Some of them are just being asked to do more than maybe is really realistic. You know, and recognize that, you know, you may go in and meet with a counselor, and if you don't click, just tell them that. That's totally fine to say, hey, you know what, you and I don't really click. I think I might be better with somebody else. We'll find someone else for you to see. You know, don't let those things stand in your way.
But take the action to try.
Yeah, take some action and try. You know, there are some other resources out there in the form of, you know, like telehealth stuff where people can get on these days. And I'm not familiar or going to endorse anyone in particular, but there are some places where you can sit at your laptop in your kitchen table and have a session with a counselor. And that, I think, is going to be a huge change in this. You know, that I think we'll see in the next few years,
accessibility
and the ability to, you know, I can reach out to my counselor via text message, you know, and, you know, sure, they may be in between clients during the day, but they can send me a text message back. And just having that little bit of contact, I think, can help, you know, carry people along and get some improvement. So, you know, there are a lot of options for reaching out and finding somewhere to go. It can be work. It's not always necessarily easy to find, but I think it's really worth it. So,
right on.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. Appreciate it.
Man.
Thank you.
Thanks.